live. Welcome to another one of my live streams where I interview talented IT professionals who got endorsed for the UK Global Talent Visa. My name is Nadia. I am a software engineer at DevRel and a UK Global Talent Visa recipient. I'm also a Global Talent Visa coach, which means that I help people increase their chances of getting endorsed for this visa. On this channel, I share information about the process of getting endorsed for the UK Global Talent Visa. And I also interview people who went through this process, through this journey, so that they can share their story, their tips and tricks of this process, all in the hopes of making this journey easier for you and helping and empowering you to go through this on your own. But also, I understand that some people don't really want to do this on their own. So this is why I've started offering also some of my services when it comes to coaching. This is my website, which you can check out if you need help with your visa application and if you would like to work with me towards this visa. And also a little bit of a plug from my side. I will be holding a free webinar next week where I will be talking about the process of getting endorsed for this visa, all the mental models that helped me be successfully endorsed, and also the mental models that have helped me help others get endorsed for this visa. So I will share a lot of what I have learned so far. This is for free, just to help you get prepared. And I also will talk about my services in more detail during this live stream, this webinar. So that's an introduction for me. And now let's go to the actual content of the event, to the thing that you are all waiting for, to my guest. So today I'm very excited to be joined by Diego. Let me just bring him on the screen. Hello, Diego. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Diego is actually a startup founder, so it will be very interesting to hear your perspective on this visa as somebody who is coming from more of a entrepreneurial background, because I know that a lot of people who watch my channel have this inclination to start a business, or maybe they already have a business and they aren't really sure how to present their documents in this visa application. So let's just start with a little bit of an introduction about you, where you're from, what you have been doing professionally, and how did you come up with this idea of moving to the UK, and especially how did you decide to use this unusual visa?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Chile, born and bred. I moved to the UK just last year, around February. So it's only been 11 months since I moved. My whole background has been in entrepreneurship, and though I have a kind of a business background from just what I studied at school, I then specialized in product roles and in more technical roles as I got involved in my own startups. I originally looked into the UK as a place where I could move, just because I thought it would be easier to raise there for any ventures that I would start. It would be easier to find talent. And then a cousin of mine who had already been living in the UK, not on this visa and not as a startup founder, he actually casually recommended I check out the Global Talent Visa. I think it's a visa that not many people have heard of, but which offered a lot of opportunities and that aligned with what I could offer. So I looked into it, and it just seemed to be the right time for me.
Yeah, so how did you approach researching it, and how did you start the process? Did you do it on your own? Did you seek external help? I hear that your friend recommended this visa to you, which is what I hear from a lot of people. So that networking really helps in this, and this is what I'm trying to achieve with this live stream, to kind of be this friend that maybe you don't have who went through this process, so that I can be this friend and my guest can be this friend. So what was it like for you, if you remember the steps that you took? That took you from just learning about it to actually applying?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, again, it was really a visa I don't think anyone in my industry group besides my cousin had heard of. And I say this being someone who had looked into different options in the US and Canada, etc. Somehow this never really popped up. And when I finally took a look at it, it just seemed a little bit too good to be true. I mean, it offered you so much flexibility as a startup founder to just move somewhere that is, a startup hub, and just go about it in a way that really let you pursue not just your business endeavors in a way that was flexible, but also your maybe personal goals you may have in moving somewhere you've never been. So that just made it so appealing for me. I think going into it, I looked into my motivations as a factor of why the UK and maybe why this visa, as opposed to other routes. I'm sure Nadia has discussed in the channel before. But this one in particular, it just seemed extremely flexible. Like I mentioned, you could start your own business and act as a company director. You could be self-employed. You could freelance. You could change jobs, everything without having to notify the UK Home Office. And there just didn't seem to be many more requirements besides just showing why you were talented as to, moving, like no financial solvency or minimum salary requirements from a job offer. So that just made it very appealing to me. And maybe on a more personal side, I think for me, I've been looking at this time in my life for a way to spend some time away from home, even if only a few years. And I think this made it so that I could do it on my own terms, and in a way that even if I did project myself in a new country and region, that I could do it and then not have to come back because my time is up or. So yeah, I thought that was very attractive.
Yeah, totally. So you mentioned that you were looking at USA and Canada as well, right? As relocation options, or you mentioned something about those countries. Did you consider like other destinations, other visas, and what convinced you to choose the UK? Was it the flexibility of the visa, or was it something else?
Well, it was. I think I mentioned not just professional reasons. I think London and the UK at large is not just like growing like BC and startup hub, and one that is on the top maybe 5 in the world, but it is also in very close proximity to the rest of Europe, and it's a wonderful city. I'd never been actually to Europe before. I'd only heard the accounts of other people about their time there and their experiences, and maybe what work and life was like in this region. So it just made it maybe so much more appealing to me than say Canada and the US, even because I think maybe more personally I align with the type of culture there might be with business and life here in the UK and in Europe at large.
Yeah, I understand. So for me personally, I had never visited London before I relocated here in 2021. But I also knew that I want to be closer to European culture since, I am from Eastern Europe, so I wanted to stay close. And thank you so much for sharing. I think that this is valuable for people who aren't really sure whether they want to go to the States, to the UK or Canada, because I think that these are sort of the 3 top options that I hear people consider. And a lot of people actually choose the UK because the visa, the UK Global Talent Visa, as you said, it sounds too good to be true, but it is true. And this is, you and I are both proof of, being able to get it. So what was the process like for you of preparing for this visa? How did you decide which kind of documents to submit? If you remember which criteria you chose, basically anything that would help somebody who is in your position, who has product background, startup background, and who's thinking of applying, but they aren't sure where to start from. Because again, if you look online, it's pretty hard to find detailed information about the documents that you need to submit. And most of the information online is actually about software engineers working for companies. So anything you can share, I think will be very valuable to people.
Yeah, for sure. So I submitted evidence in support of mandatory criteria 1, obviously. And then in terms of the optional one, I went for 3 optional criteria as opposed to just 2 as they recommend. I don't know if this was a mistake. Maybe in hindsight, I would have just gone for 2 if it would make the reviewers' job easier. But at the time, I wasn't really sure where the bar was set for what they expected a candidate to claim in order to meet one of these criterion. So I decided to just go for 3. I felt that I was confident that I might meet 3 out of the 4. In this case, I went for OC1, OC2, and OC3. OC1 being a case for innovation, OC2 being just any work you've done outside of your direct occupation that advances your field, and OC3 in terms of the commercial impact of your work. So in terms of just how I kind of laid out my application, I decided early on that I would apply as a promise, over an exceptional talent. It just seemed to me that my goals were more aligned with the advantages that I got from that application over the other. With this, I mean, I was looking into this visa because I was looking to live for a long time abroad, specifically, in the UK and Europe. And if I would be staying in 5 years, if I would be later on probably applying for citizenship, which is part of my plan, then really there weren't much advantages to applying as an exceptional talent over promise. Just the citizenship you would get 1 year prior, 5 years as opposed to 6. But besides that, it just seemed much more likely that I would get the endorsement under promise than under exceptional talent. So I went for that route in this case. Given my background, I haven't really discussed this, but most of my work has been in smart mobility and transportation. Here in my native country in Chile, I worked on my own startup, one that did e-sharing, so e-scooters, e-bikes. I started my own e-scooter sharing here in Chile. It later became a SaaS that would help people all over Europe start their own fleets. And then I started, I worked at a car sharing. Later on, I worked at a EV charging company. So it was all mobility. And I think that very specific domain expertise really helped make a compelling application. Just because it seemed that and it's true that that there was a purpose behind my interest in mobility. And when I said, in my personal statement, when I laid out my plans for what I could do in the UK, how I could advance that field, I think it just came across much more credible than if, say, I just had a lot of expertise in a wide range of different fields. That is not to say, someone with that kind of experience could not make a compelling application, but I thought, in my case, that really played to my strengths. Other than that, I had extensive founder experience. I think this global talent visa, it is in part tailored for founders, though it can work for employees in the tech business. And I also had some experience as an employee, as a product owner, and I think this also gave me some credibility. Beyond that, I think I also focus on just coming up with a very coherent plan for what I was going to do in the UK and how I could apply my skills and domain expertise there. And I also just put in a lot of time to gather very good and credible letters of recommendation, all of which would back up my claims that I would make throughout the application. So any claims that I would make, say, as to the commercial impact of my work, or the innovation that I produce in any of my startups, I would try and back up through the letters of recommendation. Lastly, on the evidence side, I think I just submitted all of my work, as much evidence as I could, just to make sure that there wasn't any reason to be skeptical of any of my claims. And just I paid no mind to IP, so I would share any information or work I've done without really any restraint, right? And so that I think really helped just show, or I guess present my case in the best light possible.
Yeah. So a couple of things that you mentioned really sounds interesting to me. So first of all, you talked about the distinction between promise and talent. So for people who are not sure, so there are basically two routes. And talent is for somebody who is more established in their career, somebody who had more than 5 years in tech. And then promise is for somebody who is a little bit earlier in their career. And as you said, indeed the requirements for promise are a little bit lower because you've spent fewer years in tech, so in the field. So obviously you didn't have enough time to have as many achievements as somebody who has spent 20 years in the industry. So that's kind of the logic behind it. So yeah, it is interesting that you chose promise, and I think this might be helpful for people who are still trying to choose which route to go. But use this kind of 5-year mark to orient yourself towards what feels more natural. But then also read the requirements on Technician Visa Guide, and this is the single source of truth for everything connected to the visa. And think whether you are really meeting the requirements for talent or promise. They are pretty distinct there, so you can decide. It's very interesting that you said that you chose 3 optional criteria instead of 2. I am a little bit surprised that you can actually do that. I was under the impression that you can only choose 2 boxes on the Technician website. Maybe this is new. When did you apply for the visa?
No, it might be new because right now, what you do is you don't really check boxes as to what criteria you're applying for. You, in a text field, you submit, you basically say which of your evidence documents or your supporting documents go toward supporting any of the different criteria. So it's all one text field, and they do say in the visa guide, at least at the time I was applying, that is earlier this year, that you should hopefully just go for 2. Again, I think I decided to go for 3 just because, in the event that I didn't meet the standard for one of the criteria I applied for, one of the optional criterion I applied for, then I wanted just that backup option. I felt pretty confident that I could check 3 of the 4. So really, I don't know that I would necessarily advise people to go that way, but it seemed logical for me.
Yeah. So I usually recommend my clients to choose 2 criteria.
Absolutely.
And right now, as I recently helped somebody apply, and you had to choose. So you had 4 boxes, like check boxes, and you have to choose 2. And I think you can only choose 2. You can't really choose 3. So I usually recommend people to choose the criteria where they have the strongest kind of claim. And if they can meet, it's actually pretty common that people can meet 3 criteria, and then usually we would choose the 2 that are the strongest and just put your best foot forward in those criteria. So one of the biggest questions that I receive is actually about OC1, which is optional criteria 1, which is innovation. Could you talk to us a little bit about how you approached proving this criteria? Because again, people really struggle with this because I think the guide on Technician Visa website is really not very specific. Yeah. So how did you approach it?
Yeah. So okay. So before this, just to maybe touch a little bit more on the promise side. Yes, I think the decision I made to go for promise over exceptional was one that I could make from my standing, given that I only had a certain amount of years of experience, not just in my field, but as a professional. I think if you have more experience, say you have 10 years of experience in the workforce, but say only 4 of those have been in your specific field you're applying through, and the most recent years, then it would also make sense that you should apply for promise if you think that might just up your chances. It's just my personal opinion. But on to your question, Nadia, on the innovation thing, I noticed the documentation was a little bit vague. Not to discredit it, I thought the visa guide was super useful, and it really helped me outline my application process. But on the innovation side, there weren't many definitions for what would constitute an innovation. So whether that was disruptive innovation or incremental, or any given different types of innovation that many times you can see defined. I decided I would just show how my work was different from anything else that had been done in my region and in my field. So in this case, I think I presented, a startup whose product showed, a vertical specific implementation of a concept that existed in other fields, in other use cases, but that had never been done for this specific space. I showed how this had been never done in the region and in the world at large. But I think, since it's vague, you can use that to your advantage as well, since you're not really held to very strict criteria. I think more important is that the innovation is successful and that there's proof of product in market. So you should show that not only is your design and your product something unique, but that it has been successful commercially, hopefully, but also maybe through any other traction other than revenue, such as like downloads or usage or anything like this. And lastly, sorry, I forgot the last one I mentioned.
So in terms of, you said that you showed that your product was innovative in your market and things like that. Did you show it through letters of recommendation, or did you just write about it yourself and presented it? I mean, people are usually looking for specific examples of documents. So I'm always curious to hear how people present evidence, either through letters of recommendation, additional ones, or through some other documents like publications, or maybe you could share a little bit more.
So I had nothing like such big TED Talks or awards or publications, nothing of the like. So it was a little bit daunting at first, but I just, in terms of just showing maybe things like proof of market, I would show, if it was a mobile application, just screenshots of the website, or sorry, the link where the app is published to at the, say, Google Play Store, App Store for iOS. If it was a different kind of product, I would show relevant just proof of market and downloads and that kind of thing. In many cases, this information can be verified publicly, so I wouldn't necessarily need to put up screenshots of my private dashboard. But yeah, I think in terms of the application as a whole, I would try and draw some consistent threads across the whole thing. So say, if I would make a claim like, this is my proof of product in market on my evidence documents, then I would make sure that these were backed up by claims by the people who were writing letters of recommendation for me. So when I would approach these people, I would make a point of this information being included in the letters.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so generally a good tip. Everything that you mentioned should be verified by letters of recommendation or by external proof in some publications, or something that they can just verify to make sure that this is not just you saying it. So this is, I think, a good segue to the letters of recommendation, which is the foundation of any successful visa application, I think. So how did you approach creating those letters, and how did you choose your experts? How did you approach them? Because again, this is something that people struggle with. They ask me, how do I decide who should write it? How do I ask them for a letter of recommendation? It's so scary because they are, founder or something like that. I'm an employee. So how do I approach it? People feel just very self-conscious about it. Okay,
so in terms of letters of recommendation, I submitted 4. You could only submit 3 officially, but I submitted 1 as evidence. The 3 that I submitted, that were mandatory, one was in support of I forget the criteria specifically, but it was by my first employer. For most of my career, I started my own startups, but then this one time I worked as a product owner for this car sharing company I mentioned before, and they basically were writing in support of optional criteria 3. That is the commercial impact of my work. As a product owner and UX UI designer for this company, I would kind of work on different projects. One of them being, optimizing the onboarding funnel for their car sharing app, and that had significant impact on how people, were onboarded and how easier it was to sign up. So that obviously impacted revenue, and I basically made the case on my application that this increments in just like how easier it would be to sign up, and how that actually translated to much more signups, generated more revenue, which made it possible for the company to raise their Series A. So why I mention this is because sometimes as an employee, I think it's easy to think that your work directly has little or no tangible impact to the organization at large. But if you can trace the incremental improvements of your direct work to something larger, and you can back that up, not just through the account of the people who you reported to directly, but also through any public information there might be, that can really make a strong case. So in this case, there were, there were newspapers, pieces about their Series A funding, and the letter of recommendation specifically would talk about how I did a great job of doing this, just how much an impact improving the signups for this application had on revenue, and how that eventually became the main reason they were able to raise their Series A at the time they did, rather than later. So that was one of the recommendation letters of recommendation. The second one was from my co-founder at the latest startup I started. It was called EPSI, and it's this community-led EV charging app. The guy who wrote the letter, he just had a lot of experience in the field. He had 20 plus years of experience, lots of experience in academia, and just as a startup founder and as a technical founder. So I used that letter of recommendation to sort of back up my expertise as a technical founder. So all of my hands-on technical work, and then also my contributions as a founder. And last, I was also able to use that letter for backing up any claims I made as to the success of the company. So if I said the company raised this much, and if the company achieved this many downloads, and what have you, I think for many founders, it's difficult to find something that is publicly available to share with people, to just back that up in a way that is irrefutable. And I think letters of recommendation can really go a long way for that. So that's what I used this letter for. Letter of recommendation number 3 I use for in support of optional criteria number 2, that is work outside of my direct occupation, that by which I advance my field. It was from the president of a guild association I was a part of, that would focus on helping regulate mobility and transportation in the region. So what I did is I took part in a guild association that would actively take part in just assisting the regulatory process of different legislation that affected smart mobility, transportation, but just any type of on-demand products and applications here in my region and country. So I think that just laying down that regulatory framework really could help each of us individuals that were part of this association advance our field, and hopefully support our own interests, right, and those of the people and the customers. So yeah, that one was specifically in support of OC2. Lastly, as I mentioned, I submitted one that was not submitted as a mandatory letter of recommendation, but just as evidence, and it was a letter of recommendation by someone who backed up all my claims about how much we had raised in my latest venture.
Nice, thank you so much for sharing. I really like their example for you being a member of a professional guild. So this is something that a lot of people can actually use for supporting the OC2 criteria, so the outside contribution. This is one of the examples that TechNation mentions, but I think people kind of don't remember it. But if you are a member of any professional organization, professional club, a designer association, or programmers society, or something like this in your country, I think this is actually a very good example that you can use as supporting evidence. But you would have to explain how you contributed, what exactly you did, as well as what this organization is actually concerned with and what it does. So I think this is all useful. But so you mentioned that you had 4 letters of recommendation, which I think is actually a pretty good number. I usually recommend people have at least 4 because it is usually safe to have a little bit more than 3 in case that TechNation dismisses one of your letters because they decide that the author of the letter isn't an expert in their definition. So in order not to lose one of the letters, it's usually best to have some extra backup letter, which you can use to prove one of your other criteria. But again, it's better not to have the application that consists entirely of letters of recommendation, because this just looks not as strong as it could be. You should have some other pieces of evidence that you use, which I think is also makes sense. So we talked about the criteria that you chose. It was a very interesting perspective to hear from you, the letters of recommendation. So I assume that you prepared all the documents on your own and got endorsed from the first try. Is that true?
Yeah, so I got endorsed at the first try. I didn't seek outside counsel or any lawyers, just because honestly I always think that when it comes to these type of applications, if it's very personal to your background and etc., and if it's not something very specific that you're looking for outside help, then it can be difficult for someone else to communicate that. But unless they specialize in this, I think before you came along, Nadia, as a visa coach, there just weren't many resources available. At the time, there weren't many people who specialize in this, and I wouldn't really trust just any lawyer from any generic lawyer firm with something that is so personal, is so it has to be so unique to your own background and experience that. So yeah, I mean, I decided to go at it alone in my case.
Yeah, I kind of had a similar approach. I also realized that I am the person who knows my own background best, so I can talk about it in more detail than any person in the world because I did all of this stuff myself. And also, of course, I was kind of budgeting as well because outside help usually is expensive. But also what I hear from a lot of people who approach me for coaching services is that they don't really want to work with, as you said, generic lawyers or, consultants who didn't go through this process themselves, because they feel like those people don't really understand kind of the context and the struggles that they went through. So I think that it's, if I was going through this process again, I would probably seek, some kind of support from somebody who went through this process themselves, because I think that we understand this process much better than people who are just kind of helping others. It just adds this personal touch. I think that is I think empathy in this process is very important. And for me, I would just feel strange going to a lawyer who doesn't work in tech, so who isn't a programmer like me. So for me to just be a little bit, I don't know, strange. So it's interesting to hear that you kind of have the same feeling. But also I think that a lot of people are actually able to create good documents on their own. Some people, I think that they struggle with this because they maybe aren't used to writing that much or preparing documents, so many documents, because you have to prepare 45 pages of documents. So for some people, it's just too much time, too much commitment of a time, and they just don't have the time. So I think each situation is different. So if you're watching this and you aren't sure if you need help or you can do it on your own, just reach out to people who have the visa, reach out to me, and I'll be happy to talk to you through your needs and your situation, because each situation is very different. And some people would benefit from outside help. Some people would be fine on their own. Some people, might need some combination of some mentoring, but also doing most of the tasks on their own. So it depends. And kind of what I do, usually I try to find a very custom approach to every client and offer what they need in their situation. So we'll be happy to help as always. So we will be going to my closing questions right now. So if you're watching this live and you waited until the end to ask your questions, please ask them in the comments, in the chat, and we'll get to them right after my final questions. So towards the end, I usually ask my guests about any kind of advice that they might want to share with people who are starting this journey of going towards the global talent visa. Or maybe you would like to share some challenges that you faced and you just wish somebody told you this in the beginning, so that you didn't have to struggle with something.
Yeah, for sure. So number one is I was working as a funder right at the time I was applying for this. And it was a full-time job, obviously, and it just seemed that it was a huge time investment. So I would recommend anyone going into this to do it with time on their side. So if they're looking, they're thinking about this for maybe say, the next 6 months or 1 year in advance, then that might be a great time to start just preparing those supporting documents, because it does take a lot of time. For me specifically, I think just preparing documents probably took 6 weeks. I do think I went a little bit overboard with just the amount of evidence and backup that I provided. But generally, I think it is a very time-consuming process. it's one where you want to go by, the visa guide. You don't want to, be too creative in terms of how, you demonstrate different criteria. So I thought that resource was just extremely useful for me, seeing exactly what types of examples of evidence you could use to demonstrate your case, and just going about it in a very structured and in a very matter-of-fact way just really helped me. Beyond that, I would say if this is something you envision for the future, let's say a year in advance, and you still are a little bit hesitant as to your ability to meet any of the criteria, I think it is a good time to maybe take some steps toward just, I guess, expanding your career and developing your career so that you do meet it at the time of your application. So, like we mentioned before, I think, and this is not something that I really calculated at the time, but my experience working at a guild association with goals of like advancing my field, but through a very different occupation that is, something that where I actually had never been trained for in the space of regulation. That just really went a long way, I think. I hope for my application, and just to maybe even add a layer of credibility to your purpose behind, why you chose your career path, and maybe why that aligns very well with what you're claiming you can do for the UK. So again, I don't want to go too specific here, but what I think the country at large and just the reviewers want to see is that you can do something for the UK. It's not all about your past, especially in the personal statement. You want to talk about what you can bring to the table, and how that really aligns well with what you're good at, your skills and your expertise.
Yeah, excellent advice. I do recommend people write the personal statement towards the end once they've collected all of the other evidences, so that there is consistency, as you said, between all of the documents. So all documents should tell some sort of a story, and in general, all of your applications should read like a story. If you think of it from the point of view of the assessor, the way they will read it, they will actually start from the personal statement. So this is the first document that they will read. So this should be a document that is very important, that should really emphasize like how you meet all of the criteria, how you meet the requirements for the visa, but also, as you said, how you will contribute to the UK digital economy. So it is a lot about, not only about you, it is about how you will contribute to the country and how you will improve the economy here. So it should be focused on the future, I think, a little bit more than on the past. So don't just kind of spend the whole personal statement talking about your career. You have your CV where you do that. So I really like this advice. And the time, I think that the thing about that you mentioned about the time is very important. People underestimate how much time this stuff takes, because when we talk about it, we're just talking, you need 3 letters and 10 documents, and it sounds not easy, but it sounds like doable. But then once you start doing it, you see how much time it actually takes. So it is it is an impressive achievement actually that you applied on the visa for the visa on your own, and you got endorsed from the first try. From what I hear, it's not extremely common. A lot of people actually get rejected if they apply on their own, and not because their achievements aren't good enough. It's just that because it's very easy to make a mistake when you're applying for the visa on your own, because you don't know all the requirements, all of the like red flags for Tech Nation, and it's very easy just to make one little mistake that kind of derails your application. So kudos to you on getting endorsed from the first time. You obviously didn't go overboard. You did whatever, everything that was necessary. And for me as well, like I prepared my documents on my own, and I spent a lot of time. I think it took me a couple of months to prepare the documents, and I spent a lot of time. It almost felt like a second job. So if you're doing this on your own, just make sure that you have enough time. That's, I think, the most important thing here. So yeah, I think money shouldn't be an issue. You can prepare on your own, but if you don't have time, I don't think that it's possible to get the visa without, you either spend time or money. You can't just not spend anything. So okay, moving on to the questions. We actually had quite a few of them. If you have some more, you can keep them coming. Okay, so we had this question: how can one determine if they're eligible for the global talent visa? So I can share my opinion, but also Diego, like how did you decide that you are eligible, or you decided that you're eligible since you applied. So what was your process of determining your own eligibility?
So I think after I got recommended, I checked this out. The visa, that is, I went to the website. I saw there was an eligibility test by the website. I actually took it, and I don't think it told me I was eligible. So that for me was quite discouraging at first. And this is not to throw any shade at the logic behind this eligibility test. It's more to say that it can pay off to look at the actual documentation in a very detailed way to see if there's any way you can present your story in a light that where people where it actually meets the criteria that people that they're assessing you by, right? So what I'm saying is your career doesn't necessarily it shouldn't just be seen in one way, right? Maybe you have shifted, you've changed career paths in your life. You've done different things. Not everything you've done will align with the set criteria for any given application like this one. So I think it's very important to see what they're asking of you, how many any of your work can work toward or can kind of demonstrate that you do meet that. And then, I mean, it is at the end of the day a little bit of a narrative, I think. So I think it just pays off to just be very diligent with how you look into what they're asking of you and how you can tell that story in a way that showcases your work in the best light possible, and achievements and everything.
Yeah, I love that response. I do know that TechNation has an eligibility questionnaire, and also some other big companies that provide immigration services. They also have eligibility questionnaires. And I don't remember if I ever took one of those, but since I talked to so many people interested in this visa, one does hear stories about all of this stuff. And I hear kind of heartbreaking stories where people reach out to big agencies and they're told that, hey, you aren't eligible because they have their checkbox list that they go through, I assume. And they look at kind of formal criteria and kind of formal requirements, and they match your experience against those points. And some of them seem arbitrary. Some of them are just something that is based on what the typical candidate looks like, but those things aren't really a requirement by TechNation. So it's very easy to ask somebody to assess your eligibility or to take a quiz and just decide that you aren't eligible because somebody tells you so, or the quiz doesn't work. And like with the quizzes, I don't know, like I don't say don't use them, but just use them with caution. So if you talk to a person, I think it's better if you talk to an expert who has experience and who can analyze your experience holistically. Then I think they can give you a better understanding. But even if an expert tells you that you aren't eligible, I think that there are different options. If you aren't eligible because you break the requirement that TechNation has, so for instance, if you are working as a consultant and like your whole career is just consultancy, then maybe most likely it would be difficult for you to qualify. And even then, I don't say that you aren't eligible because, again, since I'm in all Telegram chats on this visa and in all forums that exist, I see stories of people getting endorsed while being consultants. So which is kind of goes against the requirements of TechNation, which just shows you that it is a visa where it's very subjective. It is all about your story, as Diego said. So how you present your evidence, what kind of story you tell, and how you can convince them that you actually meet this visa. So it is it's kind of more on you to prove it than on them to reject it. So for me, my approach as a coach is that I talk to a person, I analyze their experience, and my desire is to help them, not because, I want to make more money, but because I want more people to have this opportunity. So if I see that the person is talented and they are clearly have interest, beyond just, fulfilling the minimum requirement things to get to stay employed. If I see a desire there, then I will be happy to work with people like this who are ready to do the work to maybe increase their chances, because there are ways you can increase your chances, right? Just be careful with, if somebody tells you that you can never get this visa or you can't get this visa, then I would just not be discouraged, and I would reach out to people who have the visa. And this is actually one of my goals in doing these live streams every week. So I've already done, I think this is my 20th live stream. So you can watch all of them, and you can see that none of the stories of my guests are the same, right? So each guest, they have their own story, and some of them have stories that are very non-conventional, and some of them have been told by some lawyers that they aren't eligible, and they have the visa now. So just be encouraged by them and kind of look for a way to present your case in a good light. So that's a very long answer to a question: how can one determine if you're eligible or not? I think that when there is a will, there is a way, and you can find a way to do this if you're really interested. Okay, let's move on to the next one. How much funding do you need to get qualified? So I'm not sure I understand the question. So as Diego mentioned, you don't need to prove that you have any money when you're applying for the visa, so they don't check how much money you have in the bank. You just need to pay the visa fee and the endorsement fee and the NHS health surcharge fee, which are kind of a lot of money, but you don't have to prove that you have money.
Okay, so there's no requirements in terms of your personal solvency or your any salary requirements, though they do ask how much you make, just to see that you're being paid as someone who's clearly compensated for an outstanding value add. But I guess maybe the question refers to, as a founder, how much you funded, so you've raised for your startups in order to be eligible for, I don't know, OC3 or MC1. I don't think there's any specific, guidance on this on the visa guide. So I would just say, whatever feels is exceptional. If you think it would, go toward, just kind of bolstering up your application, then use it. There's a lot of gray areas here. Say if you work in a country where wages are lower, or where just there isn't such a established framework for investment for that is BC or whatever. Maybe you can mention how much you've raised for your startup and add that context, so that people can still see, the reviewers can still assess how really special that is. At the end of the day, what I think the reviewers want to see is that you kind of go above and beyond your peers, hopefully in a way that you can demonstrate. And if you need to add context to that, because the amounts or whatever, they don't really translate too much, in the UK or in other hotspots, then just make sure to add some context and make it easy and help, for the reviewers to understand and consider your case.
Yeah, I agree. In terms of startup funding, there are no requirements as to how much money your startup needs to raise to be qualified. I heard stories of people being told by lawyers that your startup isn't eligible because you haven't raised X million of pounds or whatever, and this is not based on anything really. So if people tell you that, then do question this, because Tech Nation doesn't have requirements as to the money that your startup needs to have, but they do specify that your startup needs to be raising money or making money that should be more than your minimum salary. So it should be like a real growing business, even if it's small for now. But if you can show traction, I think it's something that is really valuable. And as Diego mentioned, make comparisons to the country where your startup is based, not to London, for instance, where it's a completely different environment and different rounds of capital being raised. So thank you so much for sharing this. Okay, another one. Did you apply with your current startup or your previous product?
So at the time of my application, I had a startup that I was building. I didn't apply through it, or I didn't make my case as my motivation to expand my startup to the UK or anything of the like. My startup actually, its go-to-market just didn't align with my own personal goals for moving to the UK. So it was a startup that was doing very well at the time, and it's still doing well to this day. I decided to leave it once I got confirmation that I got endorsed, and it was possible for me to move to the UK. So my process was actually, I first look into why the UK was a good place to start a business. And I don't think we really touched on this. Maybe I can, just
Sure.
add some context there. But I think the UK, just it makes it very easy to start a LLC. There's a great, framework for getting investment. There's amazing talent there that is constantly drawn to it. There's the proximity to other hubs, such as the US, just by maybe, the fact that the markets are kind of similar. It's the same language. Many of the culture and customs are similar. So you see a lot of US investors also look into the UK, even before they look into other markets in Europe. There's also Germany, that is, a great spot. Beyond that, I mean, there's a lot of tax benefits. I don't know if people talk about this on your channel, Nadia, but as a founder, especially raising maybe a pre-seed round, if you have SCIS and EIS as a just, tax incentive, it can be a little bit easier to raise, maybe the first 250,000 pounds. I think now it was extended to 350. So that is also good. Also, there's R&D tax credits and tax relief. That is, I forget the exact terms, but much of the money you invest towards a business at first and towards just producing a product can be recouped through a claim for tax relief. There's also value-add tax refund, and there's just, it's a very mature market. You see accelerators, a lot of institutional investors all along the the sort of the different stages for funding. So you see early stage investors that will go as long as to fund people for who the founders are. They don't really care if you have an idea or any traction or any kind of progress. Just maybe your credentials and just your promise and motivation. So and you see that there's also a lot of institutional investment towards the later rounds in investment. So I think for me, just being from Latin America, as I mentioned, from Chile, it is a market that it's quickly growing in the space of startups and VC and everything. But it's a lot different when you move somewhere where all these different frameworks are in place. So that really helps. And it's quite a big market. I mean, it's 45 million people. So if you're looking to serve customers directly in the region or in any of the proximity, in any of the regions that are, in the proximity of the UK, it can also be a great, landing spot, right? Sorry.
Yeah, definitely.
I know I was going somewhere with this. Sorry, Nadia, to cut you off. But the question was...
No worries, yeah.
The question, sorry, I forget. It was about, let me...
Yeah, it was about did you apply with your current startup or previous product?
So very long-winded answer, and sorry to apply in such a, indirect way, but I didn't. I ended up applying to an accelerator in the UK. It's called Antler. It's one of the startup accelerators, of the accelerators that are recognized by TechNation so that they can endorse you under the fast track route. So if you're looking to get a response for endorsement within 3 weeks, because your timeline is a little bit more tight, then and if you're also looking to start your own business in the UK and you don't have many connections or just much leverage from any network, then I think just looking into these different accelerators such as Antler, EF, Techstars, whatever, it can really go a long way.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. Could you share a little bit more for people who are interested in the fast track? I think you're the first person that I'm interviewing who went through the fast track that is mentioned on TechNation Visa Guide, but people might be curious as to what it looks like and what the process was like. This is, a little bit off track, but I think it's very valuable.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, number one is as per the guidance, and I'm sure this is, true. Applying for an accelerator, getting into it, and then using this in your application shouldn't really, improve your chances of meeting the criteria. It doesn't really, it's not weighed in that sense, at least as per the guidance. Whether, it does play into it, it's beyond my knowledge. But what it can do for you is if you're under a very, tight timeline, if you want to move into the UK fast and or say if you're looking to accept a job offer that doesn't offer sponsor for a visa or whatever, then I think the accelerators. I mean, being accepted into an accelerator can help. Although I wouldn't recommend anyone to get into it unless they actually want to start a business. Just because it's a very small world, not just in the UK, but anywhere in the startup and the VC world. If you're using something to further an agenda that is not like transparent, then it can work against you. For me, it just worked really well because I couldn't envision myself moving to the UK and doing anything else than starting a business, which is really mainly the only thing I know from my past experience. So it just made it very logical for me to go that way.
Yeah, so the process was like you applied to the accelerator, right? You got accepted, and then you applied for the visa, and you used this acceptance proof to the accelerator to go through the fast track, right? So this was the timeline for you, the process?
Yeah, so you apply for the accelerator. It takes a few interview rounds, maybe 2 months. For me, I think it took that much. And then if you get accepted into it, they can usually help you with the visa. There's some that can, but it's really not under the same terms that you'd be moving as if you were moving under the global talent visa. It's much less flexible. And then, once you get that acceptance, then you can submit it as evidence on your application for the visa. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're referring to the startup visa that you can also get as an alternative to global talent.
Right.
As
so
you said, startup visa is much less flexible. Yeah. So you can. It doesn't lead to permanent residency, which many people don't really appreciate. It's only for 2 years. And there are other limitations like that. So, but it's also an option if you want to start a company here. It's one of the options that you can consider. Thank you so much for sharing this. I think this is a very unique experience that will be useful to others as well. Okay, so we had another question about publication history. Do you think it's mandatory to have publication history? I guess the question is, did you have a publication history?
So I didn't. As I mentioned, I only applied for OC1, OC2, and OC3, not OC4. So I didn't apply for, the academic or the one related to the academic publications. I think even if you're not applying for that, it can go, a long way to have something that has been published, that has been, vetted, not just that has been published, but also maybe being cited. If it does actually support your field, if it doesn't really go toward advancing your field and your own personal mission, and I guess the purpose you have as an employee or a startup founder in what you do through your direct occupation, then it really won't do much for you. As long as you have other different evidence to support your application, then it's not necessary.
Yeah, I think here Daniel might actually be. I'm not sure, Daniel, if you're watching this, you can clarify, but sometimes people refer to publications as in articles published in blogs or publications kind of in industry media, not necessarily academic publications. So if this was the question about that, so could you share whether we had articles, blogs, or interviews, or any kind of media appearances?
Yeah, I did. I had some media appearances locally, that is, within my country. And it was very difficult to quantify their impact. I tried to add context to some of them where you could say, this newspaper is read by X amount of people daily. These metrics you can usually find online. That doesn't really maybe speak as to that specific section under which it was published, but unless you know exactly how many people saw it, how many people commented, I don't know how much it can add to your candidacy or add credibility to your application. But if you have it, included, try to add some context to it. I don't think it's necessary. I didn't have too much of that. I just never really focused on PR in my own startups. I was kind of focusing more on building the business, and it just wasn't my role. But I think people, especially later on in their careers, they may have a lot of support from articles and publications and media appearances. And if that's the case, then definitely include it. But I don't think it's necessary. It wasn't for me.
Yeah, I think it's a misconception because people hear about this visa and they have this idea that you have to have publications and conference talks necessarily, to apply. But it's not actually true. So you would hear about a lot of people who actually did a lot of media appearances, so a lot of PR for themselves. So for instance, when I was applying, I kind of submitted a lot of my own interviews, publications, blog posts, YouTube channel, and all of that was used. But also not every candidate is like that. So a lot of people would be focusing on their work, their startups, their business, and whatever, and not really focus that much on being a guest on, I don't know, 300 YouTube interviews in a month. So it does depend on your profile and also kind of how you present the story and your pitch in your application. So it's very different. I also just recently, actually, one of my clients got endorsed for the visa, and in their application, I don't think they had any kind of media appearances at all, or if you Google their name, I don't think it would come up that much. But they had very impressive achievements when it comes to innovation in tech and contributions to commercial growth of a business, of a company as an employee. So it is very different. It depends on the situation. If you can speak at a conference or write a publication or something like this will make your application stronger. And if you have time to do it, then of course do it. But also, if you don't have those things, it doesn't mean that you aren't eligible. Again, if somebody tells you that you have to have 3 publications on some websites to qualify, then just beware and ask yourself, why are those people saying that? Because TechNation doesn't say anything about the number of publications that you have to have. Okay, so I hope we answered the question, Daniel. If not, then just let us know. Okay, the next one is from Andrew. Can being a journal reviewer be classified as volunteering work that contributes to the growth of the AI research sector, or just professional publication? So I can maybe take that. So this is definitely a professional. So question is if you can give more details on how this cooperation looks like. So I guess you are a volunteer reviewer of academic publications in academic journals. So it's hard to answer this without getting into more details. But yeah, this can be seen as something that is advancing the field of technology. So it can be seen as OC2, so optional criteria 2. But also, I think that you can make a case that this can be a mandatory criteria as well, if you can show how this shows that you are recognized as a leader, which to me, it kind of sounds like you are recognized as a leader, because if you are being asked by some established magazine or an academic body to review others' academic work, then it does sound like you are a recognized leader. So it does depend on the specifics of your case, how you present your evidence, and what you are trying to say. So it's very common that a piece of evidence can be submitted towards several criteria. There are different opinions on whether you should do that or not, but it's just to say that focus on what you're trying to prove with this document. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay, I think this one will be next. Yeah, can being a member of an IT professional body and contributing actively be used as mandatory criteria? What do you think, Diego?
So I'm trying to understand what Andrew might mean by IT professional body. If it's any kind of, I don't know, what would you say is like the definition of that? Because I'm just struggling to see what it means.
Yeah. So Andrew, if you're watching this, maybe you can clarify. But if this is an IT professional body, I'm thinking for programmers, maybe like British Computer Society, something that people mention sometimes. So you are a member of like a professional association of specialists in this field, which has some selection criteria. So I think to me, it's a classic example of OC2 because it even mentions it in the guide. So you are a member of a field of an organization that advances the field of digital technology. And then for mandatory criteria, again, can you show leadership somehow? So maybe if it's a very exclusive sort of club and very few people get accepted, maybe you have to get endorsed by some leader in the field to be there. Or maybe within this club, within this association, you are actually sharing your your skills, your thought leadership, then yes, because mandatory is all about leadership, which can be thought leadership, product leadership, engineering leadership. So again, I guess it depends on the specifics, and this is why this is an example of why it's very difficult to give consultations in terms of replying to comments on YouTube, because for me the answer is always this classic response of a programmer: it depends. So it really depends on your case, on your documents, and what you're trying to prove here. But hopefully this just gives some idea of association. Oh, Andrew responded. Yeah, it's actually British Computer Society. I don't know how I guessed about it. Yeah.
So I would say something very much in line with what you say, Nadia. It's I think with even the question we were addressing before about publication, the things itself don't necessarily make you qualify you for any given criteria. I think with anything you do in your work, it's more how it aligns with maybe a larger mission, a purpose, or with your application and what you think you can add to the UK in value, right? So if being accepted into BCS is a sign of just having gone through a tough application process and just showing leadership. So if you can add credibility to your application through that, then that's great. But beyond that, in terms of what that can do for you, if you can demonstrate the impact that it has on advancing your field, not just any field, but yours, then it is useful. If not, then it is arguable. So it's really how you use your achievements and your work history, if it'll actually do anything for you. So I think it's important to always try and add a context to what you submit as evidence, because not always will it be clear to an outside person whether that actually constitutes evidence of leadership and what have you, right?
Yeah. I think for Andrew, probably Andrew, you're a software engineer, you can share in the comments. But for software engineers, a typical example of this is open source, actually. And open source, if you follow the guide, it's mentioned in 3 criteria out of the 4. Or it's mandatory. It can be used for other criteria as well. So for 2 of the optional criteria, and it just depends on how you present it. So it can be either significant contribution, or it can be outside work, you advance in the field, or it can be leadership as well if you see people praising you for this open source. So it's very much, it depends on your case. I think this is the biggest insight from here. And I think the next question from Andrew shows it's kind of similar line. I think can one use journal publications and conferences as mandatory criteria? Actually, it is something that is mentioned in mandatory criteria as an example. So definitely, but remember, mandatory is all about leadership, and it's up to you to prove that being on this conference is a proof of your leadership, because they might reject you if they don't see this as proof of leadership. So just answer kind of this question to yourself. Does it mean that I'm a leader if I'm talking there? And I think a useful framework here is to ask yourself, who else is speaking on the stage with me, after me or before me? Are those people leaders? If they are, then this is a perfect example of mandatory. What do you think, Diego? Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's all about how this adds to your story, how it supports it, and if you can add some context to just prove how tangible the impact or the recognition is. Right? If you're being recognized as a leader, you don't want to just say, I have a conference here. You want to say, how many people saw it, by whom specifically, if it was actually industry leaders. So just make sure that the recognition is irrefutable and that there's some metrics that support it.
Yeah. This is great advice, because sometimes I would see people have a document that is called conferences, and then they will just have 3 screenshots of them on stage with the name of the conference. So this is it's a beginning, but it's not even close to what this document should look like. You should have a lot more information there, as we mentioned. Okay, so the next one was actually about Antler. Do you need to get the global talent visa before applying for Antler? And I think we answered it before, that you first get the endorsement from the accelerator, and then you apply for the visa. But also, it's not required to get the endorsement from an accelerator. I think might be a confusion here. So it's not a requirement if you're a startup founder. Yeah.
I can speak to this because it can be either way. You can get the endorsement first, the visa that is, and then apply for Antler, and they will. I mean, I can speak as to Antler specifically, but I think any of the different accelerators, they will appreciate you having this endorsement, because obviously they don't want to fund a startup team that just doesn't have the right to work in the UK, or doesn't know if they have a route to settling in the region long term. So that is obviously an important consideration. And if you're being endorsed as a global talent, then obviously it might just help with any of these accelerator screening process in terms of just assessing how talented you might be. Also, again, as we mentioned before, if you do it the other way around, if you apply first to the accelerator in advance, understanding that they do a few cohorts every year, usually EF and Antler Techstars, they usually do 2, 3 or more programs every year. So you can even apply, say, right now for not just their next cohort, but maybe you can ask them if they would be willing to interview you for an upcoming cohort that would come later, right? Understanding that your whole visa application might just take some time. But in my case, I don't think there just wasn't much experience from their previous cohorts to understand really what the timelines looked like. For me, we haven't really gone into this, but it just took a lot of time to prepare the documents, like 6 weeks, but also just getting, endorsed, like the confirmation of being endorsed by Technation, then applying for stage 2 of the Global Talent Visa. That also took a little bit. And then obviously you are supposed to book your biometrics appointment, which is, how they kind of verify your identity before you send in your passport, and they stamp the entry clearance so you can come into the country. So that all takes time. And again, since these accelerators are running a few programs every year, it just might not align with you coming into their, next program, because they're just very short. They're usually 3 months. But it can really go, it can go a long way towards supporting your application, maybe just in terms of, the timeline and fast tracking that endorsement decision by Technation.
Yeah, you do have to watch the timeline and the dates of your visa, especially if you are on a visa right now that is expiring. Again, this is something that people ask me very often, like, what do I do? My visa is expiring. You do have to, first of all, as I'm not an immigration lawyer, I usually refer people to get consultations from immigration lawyers to not break any laws and to be within the timeline. But be very aware that compared to some other visas, Global Talent Visa is actually pretty fast, to be honest, but it still takes time, so you need to expect waiting. So the first stage that Diego referred to is usually up to 8 weeks, and the second stage depends on whether you're applying from within the UK or outside the UK, and there are so many factors there that I think it's really up to your it depends on your situation, basically your passport, where you are, and a lot of other aspects of it. So I hope this was helpful. If you are interested in the startup route, I think this is a very useful show and episode. So if you have other follow-up questions, write in comments, and we'll try to get them answered as well. Okay, then there was not a question, just feedback from Ajar. Hi, Diego and Nadia. Thanks for the session. It's informative. Thank you so much. It is very informative. And we had another question from Andrew. Should one put the link of evidence such as research journal publications in a CV? And the answer is yes, you should. This is also mentioned in the Technation guide. So you should link to your publications, to your public speaking appearances. And in general, your CV should be a very colorful and fun representation of what a great specialist you are. So it's not your usual CV that you use for applying for jobs that is focused on your skills and the tools that you use. It's more about your achievements. So I usually recommend people to create a new CV for this application. Sometimes people use their own CV. What was your experience, Diego, with the CV?
Yeah, strangely, that's maybe the one piece of evidence that I forget, specifics about. But I think for the most part, I just kept it very simple. A one-page document, majorly focused on my achievements. That is, either quantifying the impact of my work or quantifying the recognition of my work. So recognition can be measured as, how much funding you've secured, and different things. And then impact can be just how much you've made through revenue or any other types of, traction you may think of. Again, I think sometimes with CVs and with, just trying to check boxes through small pieces of evidence, it can be easy to miss some of the marks. But then if you can add some context throughout the application, that just helps for the reviewers to understand why this is in place, and obviously do that. But yeah, I think Nadia's advice is sound with this CV. Some points, sorry.
Yeah. Thank you so much. It's interesting that you only used one page. I think usually people go the whole kind of way up to 3 pages, but it really depends on your experience. You can keep things simple, but just use a lot of white space and I think with everything here, just think of the user experience, basically. Think of the person on the other end of the screen who has to read the 35 pages of document that you have created, and just think of making this job as easy for them as possible. I think that if you keep this in mind, I think you will be in the top 1% of people who apply, and this will, give you a huge advantage in this process. I think that this is it. This is the question that I wanted to cover. We don't have any more questions in the comments. If you watch this in the recording and if you have follow-up questions going forward, make sure to ask them in comments. I do check out comments and try to answer them as much as I can. This is it for today. Thank you so much for Diego for your time. We went a little bit over the the kind of expected timeline, but this was very useful, very interesting experience for startup founders about the accelerators. I think this is truly unique. I haven't seen this discussed anywhere on YouTube, which is great. So thank you so much for your time and sharing your story with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. And again, maybe just to leave with this, I would say, if you have any, hesitance to apply, just be super diligent in looking into the documentation. Talk to people, like Nadia said. It's nothing better than just seeing, how other people have done with their own applications and what advice they have. And I think lastly, consider that this is a visa that, though it's amazing and it's probably the best in the world for this type of use case, my type and maybe other types, it's one that not many people know of. It's quite unknown, and in fact it launched in 2014 and only I think there's only been maybe I think 4,000 applications, or maybe only 4,000 people.
It's 5,000 already. 5,000 applications, not endorsements. Yeah.
Right. So, and within those 5,000, half the people who apply get endorsed. So that's a big piece of information that might just encourage you to give this some thought, give it some time. If there's anything where you think you might be weak, just take some time to build that up in your career. There's always ways you can develop your career. So just don't be discouraged. And if this is for you, I would say just stick with it and give it a try.
Yeah. Thank you so much for putting this into perspective, because for me, since I'm in this bubble of global talent visa where like everybody either has it or is applying, it's easy to think that everybody already has it, or that it's so popular and it's so that like everybody's applying for it, but it's a myth. It's still very much unknown. We're still in the very early days of it. So if you apply now, you will get the advantage of being early and not facing that much competition. Although, remember, there are no limits on this visa as of now. So there are no cap on how many visas the UK can grant. So when I say competition, it's just you being compared to others. It's not like you will be judged against others and either given the visa or not. So the earlier you apply, I think the easier it might get to actually get endorsed, and the requirements, they tend to become stricter with time, with everything. So there is this window of opportunity to move to the UK right now. After Brexit, it became much easier for people from outside the EU to come here. The requirements are lower. So if you're interested in building a business here or working for somebody here, I think that, as Diego said, this visa does sound too good to be true, but it is true, at least for now. So I always encourage you to try and use this opportunity. yeah, so that's it from me. Thank you so much for joining us. We have some feedback here. Thank you. And another feedback. Thank you for this insightful session. I hope to get encourage other people in the nearest future. This is a great idea, Andrew. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all the great questions and your time. Yeah, thanks everybody. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Bye. Have a nice evening. Thanks for having me again.
Bye.